After working in a mixed animal practice for 9 years, she worked for National Pork Board, and in 2009, she joined the Center for Food Security and Public Health here at Iowa State University. Certainly, her focus has been on swine diseases and swine health. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you today about preparing at the farm level. So we're going to talk about the Secure Pork Supply Plan. And the Secure Pork Supply Plan has a large number of resources that can help producers prepare at the farm level. But before we can dive deep into the Secure Pork Supply Plan, it would be very helpful for you to have an understanding of how that fits into the disease response. So we're going to talk about that first. So just to kind of put it all into context, if we are infected with African swine fever, on day one, there's a lot of discussions amongst the state animal health officials that there would be a national standstill. No new movements would be initiated during that time. It's looking like the discussions are about 72 hours. So once that first case is diagnosed, no new animals would be allowed to move, but the animals that are already moving would have time during that 72 hours that they would need to land somewhere. The options, of course, logically make sense. It's that they would be allowed to either continue to their destination, that they would be handled somewhere in between, or that they would turn around and go back to their site of origin, depending where they are in transit. And then the idea is that producers would need to manage their animals during that 72 hours national standstill while the animal health officials work on figuring out where the disease is in the United States. So we talk a lot about, when we talk about foreign animal disease response, and we can compare it to what happened in highly pathogenic avian influenza, and that response is that circles are drawn around infected sites. So it's that 6 mile radius, and the circle's drawn, and then within that is called the control area. Depending where the disease is found, we may have circles, we may have, in this case, it would be something like several counties in a control area, or it may be that we have the entire state as a control area. And as those control areas are set up, it would be a matter that there would be movement restrictions within those control areas. What would that look like in Iowa? If the state of Iowa became an entire control area, we're looking right now in the last census, it came out that there were over 22 million pigs that could be affected by a standstill movement or movement restrictions within that control area. So we've got this national standstill movement going on. 72 hours, there's a lot of investigations from that infected premises to find out where all the other infected premises are so they can start drawing these circles or take counties or take states into these control areas. So these control areas are being established, and within these control areas, I mentioned the word movement restrictions. So what that would look like are that animals within that control area would not be allowed to move without a movement permit. Anything on and off those sites in the control area would not be allowed to move without a movement permit. So that's where the Secure Pork Supply Plan comes into play. It's working on business continuity for those sites that are affected by those movement restrictions, but not actually infected with the African swine fever virus. So that's what's important to remember here as we talk about preparing at the farm level, and these resources for secure pork, they're for those sites that are not infected. For the sites that are infected with the virus, there's going to be a whole lot of response coming from the animal health officials on what to do with those infected premises. So I'm working to help the producers that are not infected with the virus on what they can do to keep it off their farm and to request a movement permit. So I've got you to the point where in the 72-hour standstill, these control areas are being drawn. So what happens as we come out of that 72 hours? So if we have these control areas drawn, and we like to kind of compare that 72-hour standstill to what happened in 9/11. Now, I'm not trying to minimize what happened in 9/11 by any means, but it kind of helps give people that perspective. So when we first had those initial attacks, when the planes were going down, it was a matter that the way it was handled in the United States, we didn't just have all the planes land immediately where they were. I mean, it was a controlled landing. Some of those airplanes were allowed to continue to their destination. Some were turned around to their airport of origin, and some were landed somewhere in between. So they had the planes land safely. And that's the comparison that we're talking. We've got these pigs traveling all over the United States, and they need to land somewhere. And we have that 72 hours then of no new movements. So just as the planes were sitting grounded, we're going to have no new movements of hogs while the investigations are going on. So then after a few days, the planes were allowed to take off again. But it was under a whole new set of guidelines. You know, we had stronger security on the pilot's doors. We had a lot more security measures when we went through the airport. We had just a lot more that to make sure that we were safe, right, when we were flying. And that's going to be somewhat what's going on here. The animal health officials will have that option to issue movement permits for sites that have no evidence of the infection, but they're also going to have to meet some different parameters. So there's things that the animal health officials are going to want to see on that site before they're convinced that there's very little risk with allowing that movement off that site. So that's the dilemma that they're going to be faced with in an outbreak, is they're going to have to be faced with either A, I don't let these pigs move even though they're not infected because I'm concerned I might be spreading the disease around, or B, if I don't allow these pigs to move, we're going to have a lot of serious welfare concerns on these sites. So that's the dilemma and the thought process that these animal health officials are going to have to go through in an outbreak of allowing permitted movements on and off these sites within, again, that control area. So that's where the Secure Pork Supply Plan enters. And this all started on the egg side. The egg producers realized that in the disease response for highly pathogenic avian influenza, that if they were in one of these control areas and they were not infected, they were not allowed to move their product. And they went to the USDA and said, hey, wait a minute, what can we do to convince you that we're still safe to move product? So eggs were the first that were funded, and then we eventually had to where the pork producers did the same, and we've been funded by the USDA and the Pork Checkoff to work on the Secure Pork Supply Plan. So the 7-page plan can be found on our website at securepork.org. It is guidance. We kind of look at it as a playbook. So just as a football coach would go into a football game and have a certain set of plays that they want to use, depending on how the other team acts, they might have to change those plays. So we have guidance within the plan, but it is up to the animal health officials during the outbreak to make the decisions on how they might have to change their response during the outbreak. It has been the result of years of collaboration. So we've developed the Secure Pork Supply Plan. We've had 7 different working groups. We've had input from pork producers, veterinarians, industry representatives, state and federal animal health officials, different members of academia, members from the packing industry, all these different representatives that have been feeding into these plans. They are voluntary. It's not something that the government's saying that you have to do this, but if you want to request a movement permit, if you're in those control areas, then you need to comply with the request that they are making in order for them to grant you that movement permit. So again, it's not guaranteed. That movement permit's not guaranteed. The Secure Pork Supply Plan helps prepare you to get in the best position to request that movement permit. And we have a whole bunch of resources. I'm going to go through some of those on the securepork.org website. So the big thing is biosecurity. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So producers' responsibility is to protect the animals on their site. So producers have control over what comes on and off of their site. And so producers during an outbreak are going to control what they can, which has to do with their site. The regulatory officials during an outbreak, they're going to be concerned with protecting the U.S. herd and trying to stop the disease from spreading. So one of the big resources that we have is the self-assessment checklist, and you've seen the term a couple times, enhanced biosecurity. So these are a higher level of biosecurity guidelines that we need to have in place during a foreign animal disease or African swine fever outbreak. So this is what the checklist looks like. These are the areas we're going to break them up just a little bit. So if you're at a production site that already has a biosecurity plan, that's great. What you can do is go through the different measures of the checklist and make sure that they're addressed in your current biosecurity plan. What we've found as talking to a lot of production sites is they have a lot of SOPs, but not necessarily an entire biosecurity plan. So what we've come up with are biosecurity templates. So these can be, there's a type-in version that you can download. There's one that you can print off and write in. I would encourage you to go the route of the typing in because it's asked to be reviewed every year, and it'd be much easier to update an electronic version than to have to redo the handwritten copy. But they're both there. So this is for sites that do not have the biosecurity plan already. It kind of guides you through all of the different measures of the checklist are in there. There's boxes to check, things to write in or type in to answer those questions as to how you're addressing those things on your sites. We also have this information manual available. So this is a larger document. It's 40-some pages. The idea is if you're going through the checklist or the template and you're going, I don't quite understand what this means, I need some examples, there's a lot more detail in that information manual, and that again is on the website. So a little bit about that, that biosecurity checklist. So there's been a lot of discussion about compliance on the sites, and that is where the Biosecurity Manager concept came from. During highly pathogenic avian influenza, there was concern that even though there were a lot of biosecurity measures that were in place on the farms, they weren't being followed. So in all the secure food plans, we have included a biosecurity manager. And we talk about a site-specific written plan. All right, so the role of the biosecurity manager is to understand disease and understand what's going on that site. You need someone that's familiar with the site as you write these plans. So they're going to use the resources we have available and write a biosecurity plan. We encourage the assistance of a herd veterinarian. And there's some sites that we find that, especially within companies, they may have a biosecurity manager overall, but there still needs to be someone on these sites to make sure that the biosecurity measures are being followed on those sites. And then another important we've talked about today, heard a lot about is, as far as compliance, is making sure that the people on those sites understand the biosecurity measures and why they need to be followed. So employee training is also a component of and responsibility of the biosecurity manager. And then again, we've talked about that they need to ensure that those measures are followed on the site. So what is that site plan? Again, it talks about how the site meets all those expectations in the checklist. But another part is to have a map, an aerial map of that site with, and we have in the plan different things that need to be drawn on that site. Talks about different movements around the site, where you draw a line of separation and a perimeter buffer area, which I'll explain a little more in a minute. But the interesting thing about the site map is for those that are working on biosecurity plans, and I've gotten quite a bit of feedback, if you put the aerial map as you're starting to work through the plan and you're starting to draw lines, and we've been doing some workshops in different states on this, is people come in and they have a pretty good idea. They've got their movement around where the propane's delivered, carcass movement, feed truck delivery, and so on. And they've got all these movements figured out, and they've got an idea where they're going to draw their perimeter buffer area. And then as we start to talk through all the inputs and the outputs and what that means on where they drew that line and so on, there's a lot of scribbling. It's like, well, that doesn't work best on this site. Now I think we should be doing this. And so to think you're going to sit down and write a really solid biosecurity plan that's going to stop African swine fever from coming on your site in one day is a misconception. It's a thought process. It's one of those things that you really need to start thinking through the inputs and outputs and how they could be changed on a daily basis. It needs to be easy and something that people can follow, but that doesn't mean that it can be written in a day. So a little bit about training. Some people already have biosecurity training for their sites and for the employees, and that's great. So go with that, as long as they understand the measures that they are to follow when they move around the site or come on to the site. We also offer some training options. We have these employee training videos. We have one on a biosecurity introduction on why biosecurity is important, one on do not bring disease to the site, another one on this perimeter buffer area concept to help people understand that. The line of separation and a secure bench entry is just needs to be re-recorded and it'll be ready to go. And then the first three are also in English and in Spanish, both. So they're all less than 5 minutes each. So when we piloted these, the group that piloted them for us brought in the employees, pizza, lunch, and learn, and it was done over the noon hour. So it's not a real long, complicated process. Protecting the pig herd, under that heading, we have several different subheadings. Site entry, as far as making sure that you have a limited number of entries onto the site and that you can control those so that you don't have people coming from different directions or coming onto the site when they're not permitted to. Having a designated parking area and making sure that that's identified on your site map so that people, when they come on, they know where to park. This perimeter buffer area, a C&D station, which we'll talk a little bit more about, the line of separation and how you cross that, and then making sure that the buildings are locked or secure when there's no one on the site. So this perimeter buffer area. So the idea behind the perimeter buffer area is it's an area around the buildings that serves as an outer boundary to help control or minimize the amount of contamination around the buildings. It's kind of like a second line of defense. And if you have anything enter into that perimeter buffer area, it goes through a perimeter buffer area access points, and it needs to go through biosecurity measures to make sure that it's not bringing the virus into the perimeter buffer area. That perimeter buffer area is for anyone or anything that crosses. It could be equipment, items, people, and so on that cross into that perimeter buffer area. The line of separation, on the other hand, is the next line of defense. So in animals raised indoors, it's considered the walls of the building. So anytime you cross over through a doorway that is utilized, that could be a line of separation. And so then you need to have another set of biosecurity measures when you cross over into that area. That would be what many people have used as the clean dirty line over the years. That would be where we've had, in many cases, the foot baths that were shown earlier. A lot of these biosecurity measures we're putting in place. You know, the foot baths, you know, we heard earlier how they weren't reliable. I know when I was in practice, I don't know that I ever saw a foot bath that was ever taken care of to the level that it actually accomplished anything. So, you know, taking into account a lot of those things and making sure that we're not bringing that virus into the building. So just to help you visualize kind of what this works like. Now, we talk about the perimeter buffer area, but the perimeter buffer area does not necessarily mean the entire site perimeter. There are some sites that is the case, and that is how they choose to do it. Other sites would choose to draw that perimeter buffer area closer to the building. There's no set distance that it needs to be. It's just that idea that it's that second line of defense. So in this example, we have one secure entry, a really large parking lot. And then this blue area here is the perimeter buffer area. So the idea is that we have employee building and employee entry here, and these are enclosed walkways. So once you have an employee enter and take the measures, in this case it may be a shower in, shower out, bench entry, whatnot. We don't specify that it has to be shower in, shower out, because we know that that would be impossible for a lot of the grow finish sites. But they follow biosecurity measures when they cross in the buildings, and then they move throughout the building. Now, in this example, the idea would be that they remove the carcasses through the backside of the buildings. So in this case, it may be that the perimeter buffer area was drawn, and over here is the compost area. So the carcasses are taken out the backside of the building, and the equipment can move them and stay within that perimeter buffer area, and is not crossing paths out here with livestock trailers, with the feed truck, and so on, that's coming in and out of the site down here. So again, you're keeping the stuff that's in here, and you're not crossing paths with what's going on out here. Now, you see the PBA access points. In this case, it's a matter of if you have to have the feed truck driver cross over that perimeter buffer area to open a grain bin, then they're going to have to take measures when they cross over that perimeter buffer area. If you have equipment that enters into a perimeter buffer area, it needs to be C&D'd. So that would be the location of the C&D station. This is another example, and this might be an example even where that perimeter buffer area is a little bit more valuable. We have 4 independent finisher buildings here, and so in this case, we added a small shed that would be like a garden shed, where you could have the producer come onto the site, cross like a bench entry, put on site-specific coveralls and boots, and then be able to move within the perimeter buffer area between the buildings to get from one building to the other. But then when they go to gain access into the finishing building, there is a line of separation, and they would need to, again, change boots at that location. Knowing that there's not a lot of room in those, but that would be the boot change, because, again, that's where maybe there was a boot bath before that we know didn't work. So we break that virus, stop it from coming in by using a change of boots at that location. Just a couple of examples. Again, it's not stated necessarily exactly where that has to be drawn, The Secure Pork Supply Plan has been developed at a national level, and what happens in Iowa may not necessarily be the exact way that it could be accomplished in Texas. So the way that the biosecurity measures, as you read through them, are written, it gives you that flexibility of the same thing that you need to accomplish, but there's different ways to get there, and there's the freedom to do that. So a little bit about vehicles and equipment. We address both the non-animal transport vehicles as well as the animal transport vehicles in that section. And in personnel, there is an agreement in there that people arriving to the site need to have showered and changed into clean clothing and footwear prior to coming to work that day or to come to visit at the site. It discusses what an entry logbook would look like and what biosecure entry or exit procedures would be included for that site. So one thing that we've worked on with the National Pork Board was the international travel guidelines as well as the hosting international visitors guidelines. So again, it talks a lot in those. If you have people from your site traveling or if you invite visitors to come from other countries, some of the guidelines that you may want to follow to help reduce risk. It may also be that you reduce the number of visitors you have just as a measure of biosecurity. So a little bit as far as animal and semen movement. We talk in there about the incoming animals and the semen. We cover a pre-movement isolation period. And I'm going to show you a graphic of what that looks like. A contingency plan for interrupted animal movement. So a lot of that is focused on the biosecurity side. So if you're not able to move animals for a period of time and animals have to be euthanized on that site, how are you going to dispose of them in a biosecure manner so that you're not bringing other diseases on the site while you do that? Again, you're a negative site. And then we also cover the loading of animals. So this is an example of what that pre-movement isolation period looks like. And the concept is, and this is an example for FMD, but it could be applied to African swine fever also, is that if you want to move animals off your site, that you do not bring any animals on for a minimum of 7 days. Or if you've just brought animals on that came from a control area under a movement permit, then you sit tight and do not send any animals out the door for 7 days. Again, the idea is that you have a chance to keep an eye and make sure that within those first 7 days that nothing is going wrong before you move any animals off that site. Carcass disposal. Within the plan, we don't talk about or recommend a specific way to dispose of the carcasses. We still include composting, rendering, incineration, and burial. However, keep in mind that during an outbreak, especially if you are located in the control area, which again, where the Secure Pork Supply Plan comes into play, we don't know what the animal health officials are going to allow for rendering, or if they will allow for rendering. So keep that in mind. It's good when it comes to carcass disposal to have Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. And again, we're not talking necessarily about mass carcass disposal. We're talking from a secure pork standpoint, we're talking about normal everyday mortalities. Granted, you could have a disease event, so you could have a higher number, but these aren't for an entire mass depopulation of the entire site. So, what carcass disposal options are you utilizing now? Is there anything you could change at this point? I know there's some sites that use rendering now that are looking at composting on site because they've decided that that would be a more biosecure option for them and that they could also help use that to reduce endemic diseases. So they're starting to implement some composting measures on their site. So are there things as you're writing these biosecurity plans or the plan for your site that, from an endemic standpoint, could you justify changing that carcass disposal option? Or do you have a plan that you're going with now that in the event of an outbreak, you're prepared to go to Plan B? Manure management. Just for those that may not realize, manure is a permitted movement. So in the event of an outbreak, if you're in that control area and you want to move manure off your site, you have to get a movement permit from the animal health officials. So again, you have to be able to show these things to the animal health officials to make sure that they're comfortable that moving that off your site does not risk disease spread. How comfortable are you having the current methods of manure removal done during an outbreak? You know, this is a neighbor of mine, so they're trucking the manure 10 miles away. So if that is a permitted movement and that truck is coming back, how worried are they that that truck is going to bring disease back onto the site? How worried are they, how worried are you that whatever method, if you have a company that comes on, that they're going to be bringing disease with them? Were they at another site earlier today, yesterday, 2 days ago, and how clean is the equipment they're using? So there's different discussions. I know in creative ways people are thinking through how they could empty a pit, how they could at least take the top off a pit if they needed to, depending on the time of the year that this happened, if they could use a site-specific manure hose, those kinds of things that they're starting to brainstorm. In the event of an outbreak, how could they be able to at least get some of the new manure out of their pits if they were given a movement permit. And then, of course, rodent and wildlife and control of other animals. That's important to not let these animals in the building. And so it talks about making sure that you're able to keep these animals out. And then we just had a really good talk on feed. At this point, the only way that feed is addressed in the Secure Pork Supply Plan is the transport of the feed itself. That it's transported there, that it's not picking up disease while it's being hauled and delivered to the site. As additional guidelines come out and there's more research, we consider the Secure Pork Supply Plan a draft, and so we'll add those measures to the plan as the science tells us to. So when you sit down to write those biosecurity plans, are you thinking of all the inputs and outputs? And we've come up with a list that we've, when my working groups come up with drafts, we run them through the working group, we get them thoroughly reviewed, they go through another task force before they ever make it to the website. So we've got a form that's coming through the pipe. It's a few weeks away from being put on the website, but it helps you think through all the inputs and outputs on the site and any changes that you might start thinking. You know, if I have garbage coming once a week, does it need to come once a week? Could it come every other week? Or if it's coming twice a week, could it come less frequency? Should I move my garbage bin? Is there a location I can move it closer to the road so that they're not coming as far onto the road? Propane delivery. We've done a really good job at many sites in Iowa of putting the propane tanks deep between the buildings, which means when the people deliver it, that's where they have to go to deliver it. So if they're making deliveries and you're the fourth one of the day, you know, are they walking through that perimeter buffer area carrying disease on their feet from one site to the other? So, you know, start thinking through when you're drawing these perimeter buffer areas and the people movement onto your site, the biosecurity measures that you have in place to help prevent the disease from coming on your site. So these resources, again, the securepork.org is the website. And if you go, there's a pork producer tab there at the top. And down the side is biosecurity. And that's where the biosecurity checklist is. And then down a little farther are the templates. And then same place, but on the right side are the directions on how to print off an aerial map and start drawing those lines. And then the training materials, it's a different tab. We have on the top right a training materials tab, biosecurity here on the left. And these are the videos that are up on the website now. And then the posters that were also on that slide, you can order from the pork store. Producers can get those free of charge. So if you just click the link and enter the number here in English or Spanish, that you can get those. They're larger wall chart laminated, so they're safe to disinfect to get into the barns, and they're free of charge that they'll ship those to you. So we're going to talk just a little bit about traceability. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about premises identification number, or the PINs. Now, for those that had got their PIN early, I know for our farm we got it in 2006. You know, I filled out the form, I've got mine, but I haven't looked back to see, you know, we have one farm, so I know that that's the address that I used. But for people that have multiple farms, we're finding that they're going back and they're actually verifying the addresses on those PINs. And in some cases, they're finding out that maybe they went ahead and got a PIN for a site that didn't have a 911 address, and so they entered a farm office. And so the address that is on that PIN isn't actually associated with the location of the animals. So even though you may have a PIN for a site, it's good to go back and make sure that it's actually coordinated to where the animals are actually located. And then something that you can do pre-outbreak is that you can start associating that PIN on your diagnostic submissions. So those are forms that the veterinarian can fill out, so you can make sure that those are associated with the site too, as well as any animal movement information to start getting used to that. So just as you use your social security number to bring in all your information, during an outbreak, that premises identification number is going to be that site's social security number. It's going to be what ties in the diagnostic lab results, the biosecurity plan, the movements, and so on. It's going to tie everything together. So you want that premises identification number to be associated with where the animals are, and you want to make sure that you start using it in other documents. It's a good habit to get doing. So again, the pork producer heading at the top, the premises identification number on the left. For those that need the contact information of the state animal health officials in Iowa, or if you have sites in other states, there's a resource now that they have. If you click on those where I had the arrows, it'll take you to this USDA page that's new that you can click on the state and it'll give you their contact information. So also if you find that on your PIN that it isn't associated with the site where the exact location where the animals are, you also want to call that same number, and the state animal health officials in Iowa will help you get that figured out. Other record keeping that we talk about is the animal movements will be very important to maintain a visitor logbook. So you'll notice here, this is an example of the vehicle and equipment log, that it has a double logo for Secure Pork and for PQA+. So PQA Plus 4.0 is being rolled out right now. What we did, we worked with the National Pork Board that there were forms that were already included in PQA Plus, that we wanted similar forms for Secure Pork. So we tweaked the forms that were already in PQA Plus, and those are the ones that are double logoed. So if they have Secure Pork on them, those are ones that we tweaked that were currently available. We just maybe asked for a little additional information on those. So those can be used, if you've been using those for PQA, you can also now keep track using those for Secure Pork. So you need to be prepared to track movements onto and off of the site. So that's if they're doing an animal disease investigation. They'll want to know if there's a positive site in Iowa. They're going to want to make sure that you had no movements connected to that site. And they're also, if you're requesting a movement permit, going to want to know that you've had no connections with an infected site. So it's while they're investigating outbreaks as well as while they're making sure that they want to, determining if they want to issue you a movement permit. A little bit about disease monitoring or surveillance. Again, the Secure Pork Supply Plan was written for foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, and African swine fever. So we have resources for those 3 diseases on the website. We have these laminated posters. Again, they're available in English and Spanish. And you can go to securepork.org, and it tells you how to order those at the pork store. We also have some videos. They're like 7 minutes long if you want to learn more about FMD or ASF. We ask that caretakers, producers, caretakers, anybody that's in those barns taking care of those animals on a daily basis, that they learn what the clinical signs or production parameters that can go wonky that are associated with these diseases, and that they look for them on a daily basis. One thing that may happen in an outbreak is that the animal health officials may ask a veterinarian to come out and look at the animals too. There may be some diagnostic testing. We fully expect that. Right now, those protocols have not been developed. We hear that the validation for oral fluids is very close. So we would expect some of those protocols to come shortly thereafter. But if you look at the plan, you'll see that those are lacking. We do not have those in place yet, and that's the reason why for some of those samples and that protocol to be validated. One thing that we are starting to circulate is that in the event that the resources are stretched, if this becomes a larger outbreak and the animal health officials need people on the farms to start collecting samples, that they be trained to do so. So that's something that we're starting to circulate now, get some feedback from the animal health officials to see if that is something that they would allow. so that we don't have government officials having to come on the farms to test in a large outbreak, because they will be very busy dealing with infected herds. You know, to have accredited veterinarians having to travel from farm to farm to farm to collect the samples, it would be better if we would have trusted individuals that have been trained on those farms prepared to collect those samples. So that's something, again, has not been agreed on yet by the animal health officials, but it's something that we're starting to discuss and see if that's an opportunity that we could build in the Secure Pork Supply Plan. So the training materials, again, under that training material tab, there's a disease monitoring observe, so that's where it tells you can get the disease posters for inside the buildings free of charge. And then same headline or same heading there, training materials, down one where it says disease monitoring sample, and that's where you can find some of the information for the sample collections if you want to go look through that. Contingency plans are going to be very important, especially here in the Midwest. And so again, it comes back to that plan A, plan B, plan C. You know, what happens when we're talking about C&D'ing vehicles in an ice storm? Do you have plan B? Do you have an off-site location? Are there other options for delivery? One thing that we have a really hard time sometimes getting our head around is what happens during that national standstill or stop movement order. We say 72 hours, but if they're still looking where the disease is, could they say it's going to be another 24 hours, maybe another 48 hours, depending on where those, when we picture the items going off of a site, we picture cobwebs, right? It's a lot of movements that go on and off of a site to other sites, and they need to follow those to determine where the disease is. So while there's that standstill, there's going to be welfare concerns. How are we going to take care of those animals on the site? And again, I've already mentioned manure storage. What happens if you're not granted a permit to move manure off your site when you request one? Do you have any alternative options? That's a very tough one. So the things that you can do, preparing at the farm level right now prior to an outbreak, check that pin and make sure that it's updated with the location of the animals. Start using it on animal movement records and diagnostic lab submissions. Work on that enhanced biosecurity plan for that site and implement measures that you can justify prior to an outbreak. So that's what I'm hearing from sites that are working on these. You know, what can we do that might help now decrease the incidence of PRRS or PED on our site, where they could financially justify making some of those changes now. Work on recording your animal movements and be prepared to track other movements onto and off of the site. Have all the caretakers know the clinical signs associated with these diseases. And then again, you can look at some of that sample collection information. And just for your own awareness, Secure Pork is not the only secure food supply plan. We've been working for the Secure Milk Supply Plan for some years. There is also a Secure Beef Supply Plan, which addresses foot-and-mouth disease. And just this year, our group started working on the Secure Sheep and Wool Supply Plan. Secure Sheep and Wool Plan. Wool Supply Plan, yeah. Those are all in the works too, and they all have their separate websites. So again, that's Secure Pork, where you'll find the resources. One other thing that I want to mention, because some of you may be going, oh my gosh, you've presented a lot. This biosecurity plan sounds like it's not an easy task. I don't know exactly where to start, how to work this into usable chunks that I can start implementing on my site. So the Iowa Pork Industry Center is sponsoring these different workshops that'll be coming up. You can see the dates there. You can go to their website to get more information. There's two parts to each of these workshops. There's a morning session that's a couple hours where it's going to cover the disease response, what the national standstill will look like, and go more into what those initial few days would look like. And then the afternoon is going to be focusing on the Secure Pork Supply Plan. So if you bring aerial maps, we'll be there. We'll start working through what those lines might look like on your site, talking through your inputs and outputs, and kind of helping you get rolling on what a biosecurity plan could look like and get you going on your site. So a lot of extra hands-on help for that. That's really all I have.
Questions for Dr. Zaabel? No questions? You answered all their questions?
Oh, this is so scary, though.
With that, we thank you for your attendance. Oh, here we got one. Here.
What about interior movement of hogs? And like, I got a feral and I can't wait 72 hours. If they need to be in feral.
So the question is, what happens when I can't wait 72 hours?
Yeah.
And that's the concern with the national standstill order. So that is being discussed. It's being exercised amongst state animal health officials, that they're given scenarios and working through that. And it's going to be very, very difficult. But that's something that right now it sounds like that is the direction that they're headed. There's a lot of efforts being put into, if we can beat this on the front end and take a few extra days, as painful as it will it save us years on the back end if we can stop it from spreading? So that's a lot of the thought process behind it.
Yeah, but you still got to do something with that animal that's going to have pigs.
Right, so then you're faced with the difficult question. If you're 3 days out, there's people that are starting to discuss logistics that they could do, moving sows out and leaving pigs in crates. What could they do? Or are they to the point where they would have to euthanize some of those animals? And those are some of the tough decisions that producers are discussing and trying to figure out what would best work on their farm.
Are you ready?
So the 72-hour standstill with movement, is that just applying to live animals? So I'm thinking about this, we're hearing that ASF is transmitted through meat and things like that, and obviously that means that would be fed to them, but what does that mean on the processing side? So livestock that's currently live at a processor, are they supposed to stop movement on them? Do those continue to go, and what does that mean in that time period?
So I believe right now, and again, they're still exercising it, so this could change. And by exercising, that states get together, and many states at a time, and discuss scenarios and how they would allow that to play out. And so far what we're hearing in Iowa, and many other states too, is, for example, feed delivery would be allowed to continue during that time. It's not that they're trying to stop feed delivery. So feed would continue to be delivered to sites during that 72 hours. If animals are going to the packer, they should be allowed to continue to the packer, and the packer should be allowed to continue to process. Again, those animals that are on the road.
Now,
if you had pigs that were going to be loading out in 10 hours, and you had the truck scheduled, and you've got everything, let's say 3 hours, and you've got everything scheduled for those to move, they wouldn't be allowed to move. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess that's sort of what I was understanding. I did pose another one, I guess, if it's okay. So feed being able to move, those of us who have on-farm feed processing, so we would be moving from site to site with feed. Right now that's understood that would be still allowed versus your, commercial processor or an off-premise feed manufacturing. You understand my difference?
Right.
So the feed being produced on a site that actually has hogs on it, for example.
Right. So I don't know that they've come up 100% exactly what the feed delivery would look like during those 72 hours. We know that once they have the control area set up, that the feed would have to move under a permit. So then it would come into you having to convince them that moving feed from that site where there's hogs and you want to transport feed to another site, that would be moving under a permit. So you'd have to convince them to get the movement permit that would be an okay move, and it would only be you could only move it if they granted you that movement permit. During those 72 hours, let's take that step back, they haven't established for sure yet if that would be under a permit or special how that would look, or if they would just allow it to continue. But you pose a very good question. I think that they're going to have to keep thinking through.
What's the plan on getting the word out to producers if that does happen, and then how quickly can they get it to all them?
So on the national standstill, the thought process is during that first case that there will be a national announcement. It will be the Secretary of Ag, probably the governor of that state, stating that the first case of African swine fever has been found, wherever. And so there's a lot of thought that social media, social media sends the word out very quickly. But there's a lot of information ready to go out from the National Pork Board, from the state associations too. So if you're signed up with any of those communication mechanisms, some of them they'll text information, there's some emails. So anything that you can do to sign up with the state organization, with the state, anything to get that information. They have a lot of communications ready to go in the event that it happens. So I would expect you to get emails if you're signed up for those kinds of things. I know the National Pork Board has a text communication. The state will be sending out controlled messaging. I know that the state's very concerned to make sure that they don't identify that first herd, if it happens to be in Iowa. There's a lot of that going out that I would expect that you would find out probably through a lot of different mechanisms.
So just to clarify, the 72-hour standstill would be the starting point, and then from there, it potentially could be released or not released for a number of hours?
So our center did some workshops with the Iowa Department of Ag, and the message at that point was that there would be a 12-hour grace period is what they're envisioning at this point. And so they would allow 12 hours for any shipments that are currently on the road to land. Again, that would be no new movements, but anybody that's on the road has 12 hours to get in position. Then after that would be the 72-hour standstill. So you'd potentially be looking at 84 hours. And then at the end of those 84 hours, it would be a matter of if they found 10 sites in Iowa, let's talk Iowa, we're 10 sites in Iowa that are connected and they're still drawing their lines and they're still finding more positives popping up, they may say we need another 24 hours to keep figuring this out before we're comfortable issuing any movement permits. Okay? So it depends what happens on where they find the disease. If after 72 to the 84 hours they're not finding any cases in Iowa, that's a very different picture. Because when you're outside that control area, if you're not in a control area, you keep moving, right, after that 72 hours. If you're not located in a control area, so after that 72 hours, if they found no cases in Iowa and you're still a free area, you're not moving under a movement permit. However, if after 72 hours the entire state of Iowa is a control area, that's a very different picture. So it kind of depends where they're at with drawing those circles after the 72 to 84 hours.
Pam, even as we visited, that initial 72 hours might be nationwide or might be a defined area. We don't know at this point.
We don't know. Again, the states are all discussing exactly what their plan is because that state is under the jurisdiction of their state animal health official.
It's kind of my understanding that some people are giving quite a bit of thought to trying to come up with alternative places within that environment, older buildings or whatever, to house, for example, in this gentleman's instance right in front of me, to house some weaned pigs in older facilities or whatever for a couple of weeks. Now that's a stretch, but some companies, I believe, are working toward that. Is that not correct?
So that would be correct if it was on the same premises within those 72 hours.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. There are some people that, they're investigating other options on that premises.
Right.
Now, there's also a lot of discussions about swapping buildings and things like that. So if you're in a control area and there's an empty building in a control area and you're more likely maybe to get a movement permit within that county or whatnot, that you could use that building instead if they're not getting a permit to bring animals in. So there's a lot of discussions on that sort of thing too, depending where the disease is and where the disease isn't.
And then like on the feed mill situation where there's a feed mill on a production farm itself, it really kind of depends on how you draw your lines, if possible, on your secure area. Isn't it rather that mill has to be on site or whether your mill can be out of your restricted area?
Well,
correct?
and so much depends on the movement too. You know, how close it is. We're working with one of the Iowa State farms right now that has the mill right there, right next to the buildings. You know, depending if it's a little farther away from the buildings, depending how they have people and truck movement in and out of that facility, that can all dictate. But like you say, if you can keep that out of your perimeter buffer area, that would be the best option.
Well, that helps site biosecurity, but the ultimately, to me, on this whole is it in the control area? And if it's in the control area, it's a whole different ballgame as far as the official control area.
Everything in that control area is going to be moving under a movement permit.
Yes.
Yep.
But on my site, I have more than one site, it's more likely to be there. I can't move from site to site. Or, I mean, unless you got a permit, if you get a permit, you may be able to.
Yes.
But can I move in the site that I got that has more than one building? Can I move pigs from one building to the other building?
Right. So in that so you can always move animals within your own site.
Within your own site.
Within your own site. So if you've defined your site, you can move animals within your own site.
Yeah.
Now, if your site is spread out, you know, there's some sites in some parts of the country that encompass acres. That if you want that entire site to be under one premises, if it comes up positive, the entire site is quarantined,
Well,
right?
My other
So-
sites are separate.
Right. So the idea of secure pork is that if you're negative, that you can get a movement permit from the state animal health officials to be able to move your animals from one site to another site under that movement permit. So that's once the control area has been established. That's a little different than that initial 72 hours while they're looking where the disease and they're not allowing any new movements. So controlling that in the first 72 hours when you're not allowed to move pigs versus once they have the control areas set up and now anybody that they're saying we will allow permitted movement and you can put in that movement request to get that movement permit. And they'll look at all these things we talked about. You know, they may have the herd veterinarian determine that your biosecurity is in place. There may have been sample collection and so on that they'll say under these things, you can ask for a movement permit. And that's what we're helping with Secure Pork is getting your ducks in a row so you're better prepared to say, here's everything you asked for, will you grant me a movement permit?
Got another question.
So in regards to your control area, say a packing house falls in that area, what are the regulations on animals that are in the facility? Obviously movements will stop after 12 hours. Will we need to hold those animals in regards to traceability efforts, or can we finish our day's work, empty our barn, and work on sanitation or whatever we deem fit in the facility?
So if you're talking the packing plant within the first 72 hours,
Yes.
and again, this is all still being discussed, but the idea would be that you go ahead and process those pigs that are in your facility.
Okay.
And then you'd be sitting with no new pigs coming in while they figure out where the disease is.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yep. Thank you, ma'am.
Anybody else? Let's please give Dr. Zaabel another hand.